Hello dear friends, welcome back to Top Lesson for You. Friends, as you know that we are discussing about the skeletal system. Now in this system we have already recorded some videos about the bones of the head, right? We have discussed them, we have just named them, and we had said that we will have different lectures on each bone in detail, and we will discuss each markings which are present, each landmarks and attachments of muscles and ligaments to every bone. I will discuss inshallah in detail. So see you there. We will discuss each bone in detail. Now here we are going to discuss about the pelvic bone, right? And some of the students have requested me to please sir record a lecture about the anatomy of the pelvis, right? So right now we are discussing about the pelvic bone, and then we will continue our lectures discussing about the pelvic or pelvis, right? I'll say that we will discuss about the pelvis, right? So here I'm going to introduce the lecture that is the pelvic bone, right? And what is pelvic bone? Pelvic bone is a basin shaped bone. Why? Because if you want to see it here, we have it. This is the pelvic bone, right? So this is anterior posteriorly. It should be held like this, right? And I will discuss how to hold it and everything we will discuss later. So this is the pelvic bone, right? And you can see here, if I want to pass certain substances from this side, from the superior side, they will come out from its inferior side, right? So in our houses we have different wash basins, right? In which if we wash our hands, they are like this, right? Like this, right? So if you wash here, this is wash basin. So if you are going to wash your hand here, right? So the substances which are which get together from the washing of your hands and everything, the water and everything, they will pass from the upper surface to through the lower surface, and they will drain, right? Same is the case with your pelvic bone. Your pelvic bone is a basin shaped bone, right? And then what? Then it connects the trunk of your body, right, to the lower legs, or to the legs, or to the lower limbs, right? So let me write the definition here. It is a basin shaped complex bone. Why it is called complex? Because it has many more landmarks first, and then it is itself made up of three bones. We will discuss those bones later. So it's a basin shaped complex bone which connect the trunk to lower limbs. We will say lower limbs, we will not say the legs, right? So this is the definition of this pelvic bone. Now the pelvic bone, your pelvic bone is also known as the pubic bone. Pubic bone, and it is also known as the hip bone. Hip bone, right? And it is also known as the basin of the body. Basin of your body. So these are the, and we should not forget that it is also known as the pelvic girdle. Pelvic girdle. Right, friends. So these are all the names for the pelvic bone: the pubic bone, the hip bone, the basin of the body, and the pelvic girdle. So this is your pelvic bone here in this model. You can see here, this is your pelvic bone, and here we also have it. This is our pelvic bone, right, friends? Now the next important point about the pelvic bone, we will go in detail of it, don't worry, and we will record it completely. What are the functions of this pelvic bone? What does this pelvic bone do? Functions. the first and the important function of this pelvic bone is that this bone, right, supports your upper skeleton, right? Look carefully, your upper trunk, or we will say that your axial skeleton, right, is wholly solely in contact with this pelvic bone. So this pelvic bone keeps your axial skeleton in its position. So the first function is that this pelvic bone performs is the support function. What does it mean by this? The pelvic bone is responsible to support your axial skeleton, as your axial skeleton is located on your pelvic bone, right? Then we say that what is the next function of the pelvic bone is that it connects your upper skeleton to your lower skeleton, or we say that it connects your axial skeleton to the lower limbs, right? So it connects axial skeleton to lower limbs. This is the function. Now the third function of this pelvic bone is that it performs protection. It protects your different viscera. How? Your different abdominal viscera, or we will say different pelvic viscera, are located in your pelvis, right, in your pelvic region. So this bone, right, this bone along with its certain ligaments, right, surround around those different viscera which are present in your pelvic cavity, and those organs or those viscera are well protected here. So we said they perform the function of protection. The next important function of your pelvic bone is that it helps in the balance of your body. If there are any default in your pelvic bone, your body balance will be irregular. So this pelvic bone helps in the balance of your body and the lower limbs also, right friends? Then the next function of your pelvic bone is that it is responsible to bear your body weight, right? So it bears body weight, right? If I'm standing, right, my upper skeleton, or I will say that my shoulder girdle, upper limbs, and I will say the axial skeleton, all are located above this your pelvic bone. So this pelvic bone is important to support your upper skeleton, or wholly solely your axial skeleton is supported by this pelvic bone. So we say the weight of our upper body parts are controlled or supported by or beared by the pelvic bone. So this is the function. And the next important function of your pelvic bone is that it transmits body weight to legs, right? So whole body, right, upper body parts, they have certain mass, they have certain weight. So this weight is taken by your pelvic bone and is transmitted towards your lower limbs, or I will say your legs, right? So pelvic bone is responsible to transmit your body weight to the legs. And then there are next functions of this pelvic bone is that it helps during childbirth. In case of females, when the childbirth, this bone is responsible to help during childbirth. So that is another topic. We are not going into the detail of that. So it helps in the childbirth also. And then there is another function of this pelvic bone is that it provides attachment to muscles, different muscles which are present in your pelvic region, right, and certain muscles which are connected to your abdomen, right? So all those muscles are given attachment, or those muscles are attached with your pelvic bone. So the pelvic bone is responsible to give attachments, to provide attachment to different muscles. And then certain other functions of your pelvic bone is that this bone is responsible to make the pelvis of your body, right? So I will write it here. It makes pelvis. How? We will discuss the pelvis in detail in the next coming lectures, but here look carefully. This is the pelvic bone, right? And here has been formed a cavity, right? Here is the formation of a cavity. This cavity is called the pelvis of the body, or the pelvic cavity. So this pelvic bone, these pelvic bones, right, are responsible to make the pelvis of your body, or your pelvic cavity, in which different important viscera of your body are located, right? So pelvic bone is responsible to make the pelvis. And the most important function is that these bones have certain sphincters which help in the passage of feces and urine outflow and urine excretion, right? So they help in urine and feces excretion, right? So these are certain functions of the pelvic bone which it performs in our body. So what is pelvic bone? Once again, pelvic bone is a basin shaped bone which connects your trunk, or we will say your axial skeleton, to the lower limbs. It is also known as pubic bone, hip bone, basin of the body, and pelvic girdle. And these are certain functions of your pelvic bone which it performs in our body. Now the next important thing is that what does it do? This pelvic bone, as I said, that they make the pelvis of your body. So your pelvis is made up of what, right? So let me write here: formation of pelvis, or pelvic cavity. Your pelvic cavity is wholly solely formed by certain bones and ligaments. And what are those? Let me write them here. Look carefully. Pelvis or pelvic cavity. What is pelvis, or what is pelvic cavity? Pelvic cavity. As in the lectures before, we have I have discussed about the cavities of the body. So if this is a person and he is standing here, right, like this, right? So here is a tissue which separates the abdominal cavity from thoracic cavity. So this is thoracic cavity, and then here is your abdominal cavity, and then here is your pelvic cavity. So what is pelvic cavity? Pelvic cavity is the cavity which is present below the abdominal cavity, formed by the pelvic bones. Yeah, what is pelvic cavity? Cavity formed by pelvic bone which is located below abdominal cavity, right? The cavity which is formed by pelvic bone, right, and it is located below or inferior to the abdominal cavity. This is called pelvic cavity. Now the pelvic cavity is formed by what? It is formed by bones. Yeah, the pelvic cavity is formed by bones. And what are those bones? Look carefully, and we have them here. Number one, we have the pelvic bones, or we have the hip bones. We will say that these are called these are made up of bones. So bones are, what are those bones? Those are the hip bones, right? And how many hip bones are there? I will tell you. And number two, there are the sacral vertebra, sacral bones, right? And then there are the coccygeal bones, or we will say the coccyx bones. So how many hip bones are there? There are 2 hip bones, right? And I will show you right now. And then there are how many sacral bone? 1. And how many coccygeal bone? 1. Now look carefully. Look, this is your pelvic cavity, or this is your pelvis, and I'm holding in my hand, these are the pelvic bones, right? These are pelvic bones, and these bones make a cavity, and this cavity is called the pelvic cavity or the pelvis. So I have written here, what is pelvic cavity? The cavity formed by pelvic bones, which is located below your abdominal cavity, as it is located here. So above your abdominal cavity and below abdominal cavity, there is your pelvic cavity. Now look carefully. This pelvic cavity is formed by bones, and what are those bones? The first, this one, this is called your hip bone, as I have it here, right? This is hip bone. Now how many hip bones you have? You have one on the right side and one on the left side. So how many hip bones do you have? 2 hip bones, and itself this hip bone is made up of 3 bones. And what are those? The ilium, the ischium, and the pubis, and we will discuss them in next lectures, right? The ilium, ischium, and pubis, we will discuss them. Okay, so pubic bone, one on right side and one on left side, and then there are the sacral vertebrae. These are the sacral vertebrae, you can see them here, sacrum. Here is sacral bone, and then there is the coccygeal bone. Right? So coccygeal bone, sacral bone, and 2 hip bones. How many hip bones? 2 hip bones. How many sacral bones? 1. But if you want to be more precise, to be more correct, as I had told you in the previous lecture, and I will write it with a red color, that we had said that there are 5 sacral bones, right? And then there are 4 coccygeal bones. Okay, so if you want to know it in this sense, and then there were, and look carefully, hip bone was made up of 1, 2, and 3 bones, the ilium, ischium, and pubis, and it makes about 6 bones. Why? Because 3 on the right side and 3 on the left side. So if this is a bone and this is a left pubic bone, this is left pubic bone. Now look carefully, this is ilium. 1 ilium on the left side, 1 ilium on the right side. So 2 ilial bones, 1 pubis on the left side, 1 pubis on the right side, 2 pubic bones, and 1 ischial bone on the left side, and 1 ischial bone on the right side. So 2 ischial bones. So 2 total 6, and 6 hip bones, right? And sacral vertebrae, there were 5 sacral vertebrae, but they are fused together and they make 1 bone, that is called the sacral bone. So if we say that there are 5 sacral vertebrae and then there are 4 coccygeal vertebrae, right? So how many total bones will unite to form this pelvis of your body? That is about 15 bones are responsible to make the pelvis of your body. And other than these bones, we have certain ligaments also which are present there. And then we have the first we had bones, the second we have joints, right? And what are those joints which make your pelvic cavity or your pelvis? So there are 2 different joints, or other than that we can say there are many joints, but in books they have written that there are 2 different groups of joints that make your pelvic cavity, and the first one is your symphysis pubis. Symphysis pubis, right? And then there is the sacroiliac joint, right? So the sacroiliac joint, let us see them here, and look carefully. There is the symphysis pubis. Now if this is a pubic bone, right, and they make the pelvic cavity, so the pelvis or the pelvic cavity contains this is the first joint, right? Anteriorly this is called the symphysis pubis, right? And then if you turn it back like this, then there is the joint between the sacral vertebra, right, and the ilium. Okay, so this joint, you can see that here, this joint is called the sacroiliac joint, right, on this side also. So the sacroiliac joint, right, on right and left side, and the symphysis pubis joint anteriorly, right? So superiorly or posteriorly we say the sacroiliac joint, and anteriorly there is the symphysis pubis, right friends? So these are the two joints of your pelvic cavity or your pelvis, and then there are ligaments present in the pelvic cavity, and these ligaments are responsible to hold these bones together, right? And they make strong connections between these bones and certain muscles, and they make a different important supports for the viscera which are present in your pelvic cavity. So these ligaments include what are we will just write the names of those ligaments here, but while we discuss about the walls of the pelvis, then there we will show each ligament in its position, and the attachments of those ligaments we will discuss later lectures. So look here, what are the names of those ligaments which are found, which make your pelvic cavity or which make your pelvis? So what are those? The first one is your obturator membrane. Obturator membrane, right? Then the second one, and okay friends, and I'm showing these membranes or these ligaments in the diagram. You can see it on the corner of this video, you can see them there. So obturator membrane is there, and this obturator membrane is present here, and makes here it makes a membrane in the obturator foramen, around the obturator foramen. I will discuss it later, don't worry guys. So obturator membrane is there. The second ligament which is present in your pelvic cavity, that is the inguinal ligaments. Inguinal ligaments are there, and I'm showing these inguinal ligaments also in the corner of this video, right? Inguinal ligaments. The third ligaments which are present are called the sacrotuberous ligaments. Sacrotuberous, and I will discuss them later. I'm just naming them sacrotuberous ligaments. Okay friends. Then the fourth ligament which is found in your pelvic cavity is the posterior sacroiliac ligament of upper class, right? We will discuss it later. So there is the posterior sacroiliac ligament upper, right? And number 5, there are the posterior sacroiliac ligament which are present lower, and I will discuss them later, don't worry guys, right? And I will show them also. The sixth group of ligaments which are present are called the sacrospinous ligaments, right? Let me name it here. Sacrospinous ligament, and I am showing it in the corner of the video, and then also we will see them in the next coming lectures, don't worry. The sacrospinous ligament is present in your pelvic cavity or your pelvis, and then there is the anterior sacroiliac ligament, right? And number 8 group of ligaments which are found in your iliac region or in your pelvic cavity, these are called the iliolumbar ligaments, right? Iliolumbar ligaments, right friends? These are the ligaments which are found in the pelvic cavity. These are the bones which are found, and these are the joints which are found in your pelvic cavity. And what is pelvic cavity? How is the pelvic cavity formed? We just discussed it in this lecture. What is pelvic bone, right? Okay friends, now in the next lecture I will discuss about the anatomy of this pelvic bone in a big detail, and all those important landmarks of this pelvic bone I will discuss. The attachment of muscles and the attachments of ligaments to it, right? And then we will move further forward and we will discuss about the boundaries and walls of the pelvic cavity. So see you guys in the next lectures. Till then, Allah Hafiz.